I just got to share this. This is just one of those things. As we were literally praying, and as we were literally praying over Billy and Bonnie, I felt a buzz on my wrist as we were literally praying that. And Bonnie texts me and said, "They just ruined my drains, and she's going home today." So I mean, it's one of those things that you just kind of one of those things where you just kind of go, well, that's you want to go, that's a coincidence, that's some good timing. But when it comes to God, I don't believe there's ever anything. We've been praying for her. We've been praying for her this morning already, and God is doing a work. We just want to be able to recognize and acknowledge when God is doing something, whether it's small or big, it does not matter. When God moves and God works, it's always a great and mighty thing. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you guys as we prepare for this morning. I've kind of struggled with this morning. I've been tossing and turning over this, and it's not because I'm sitting here going, oh, do I say this? Do I not say this? I'm trying to go, how do I say this? How do I communicate this in a way that we understand? So I'm going to apologize right now. I'm going to kind of geek out on you a little bit here this morning. You're going to be sitting there you're going to learn some of my interests a little bit more here this morning, some of the things that I like. And I am sorry, it's going to go a little bit, I don't think I can think to say is I'm going to geek out here a little bit. But I think I have always been one. I love movies. I like a pretty broad arrangement of movies and books. Only thing I don't do horror, and I don't really like suspense a whole lot. I like to be able to sit back and relax as I'm watching those things and reading those things. I don't like to be sitting there worried about that someone's going to pop out of around the corner or something like that. For me, that's not relaxing. I want something that I can relax to be able to enjoy. So I'm one of those. Probably my biggest one, I love action. I love like historical action movies. I love science. Now, I like science fiction to a certain degree. I don't go like the Twilight Zone sci-fi, like that real far off sci-fi. I'm more of like the Star Trek, Star Wars sci-fi type stuff, not the comic book sci-fi, not the really, really far out stuff. But I've always loved that stuff. Even when I was little, the cartoons, the things the TV shows that I would watch, I always loved things where you had the good guy and the bad guy, and it was always a battle, there was some epic thing that was going on. So like when they came out and they started doing things like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and all that, I loved that type of stuff. When we went to the theaters and watched all of those, we bought them on DVD and I'd watch them over and over and over again. I just loved that type of stuff. And I said, but I always looked at it, and as I got older, it was always one of those things, it was always a good versus evil. It was light versus dark. I always enjoyed that stuff, that battle that was going on. And I'll tell you, my parents, back in the day, they got a lot of flack from those in the church because my parents were allowing me to watch certain cartoons that people were claiming power in something besides God. And so, I was a child of the 80s. I loved He-Man. Oh, I loved He-Man when that was, I loved that cartoon when I was a kid. And, my parents got so much flack because he was claiming power in something besides God. Care Bears. I even like the Care Bears. Come on, everybody in the 80s, everybody loved the Care Bears. But they claimed power in something besides God. And I understand that argument. I get that. I understand that. But my parents were also sitting there going, well, but he's seeing good versus evil. It was clean. There wasn't like it was anything, not like some of the stuff that could be out there, especially now. So it was clean, but there was an epic battle that was going on. There was a supernatural element to it. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not here to defend it one way or the other, but for me, it helped me grasp the supernatural aspect of God. It helped me grasp that there are things in this world, and there was things about God that I was never going to understand. That's why we use the word supernatural. I wasn't going to be able to grasp those things. I just had to accept them. And like I said, we have to be careful. I know we have to be careful about some of those things, because they can open the doors for us to be led in a belief system and a belief about things. And we're going to talk a little bit about that this morning. As I reflected back, and I sit there and I think about, yeah, I gained this aspect, but I also see how it was helping us in culture and society grasp things in maybe a way that we didn't need to, or that we have to be careful of. And it wasn't just that. There's lots of different things. But let's face it. We live in a world to a certain degree that has let go of the supernatural. If you look at our world as an overall whole right now, we have let go of the supernatural. We live in what some people say, we live in the age of reason. We live in the age of science, where we can explain everything through science. And so I'm going to try to explain this. The belief system and the belief structure that we had, this goes all the way even back to the Greeks and before the Greeks. They believed in the eternal. And then there was the temporal. Well, obviously the eternal means it goes on forever, right? It never dies. That's God, the eternal. And then there's the temporal. That's here on earth. And they were always trying to work on those belief systems. If you go back and you look at things, belief systems were trying to get people to elevate themselves from the temporal into the eternal. You know, you sit there and, you get terms like nirvana and different things like that. They were trying to elevate themselves from that temporal to the eternal. And God dwells in that eternal realm. And we don't understand it, we don't grasp it. It's the supernatural. And what changed for Christianity was, and what was so big was, and was mind-shaking for everybody, was for the first time in history, the eternal came down to the temporal. Christ came down from the eternal and came down to our level at the temporal. That was groundbreaking. That was mind-blowing for people in New Testament times as they were preaching and they were going out and the disciples were going out into the world and everybody was wrapped around this philosophical mindset, this theological mindset that we have to elevate ourselves from the temporal to the eternal so we can understand things, we can grasp things, we can experience things. And then here comes the disciples, here comes Christ, and here comes the disciples going, oh, hey, we got a different route for you. Because our God came down to us. He made it easier for us to be able to experience the eternal, to be able to have those things. And as I sat there and you look back at history and you look back at these things, and this goes back hundreds of years, but I'm going to tell you, I've seen, even in my own lifetime, I feel like I've seen a shift occurring. I love the superheroes. I would tell you, you get into superheroes and comic books, and you get those people that go, well, I'm a Marvel person, or I'm a DC person. You know, DC, you've got Superman, and Batman, and Aquaman, and Wonder Woman, and then you go over here to Marvel, and you got Iron Man, and the Hulk, and Spider-Man, and all of those over here. I was a DC guy. I loved DC. I love Superman. He was, and most of you guys have probably seen when I have a shirt that has cufflinks. I have a little pair of Superman cufflinks that I wear. Okay. You know, I have a Superman license plate, thing, but I can't fit it on my car right now. It's too big for my car. And so I love this. He was my man. I loved Superman. I had all his comic books. I had all this stuff. I mean, he was the man. But there was a certain amount of it that Superman. There was a certain amount that he was a superhero. There was a supernatural aspect to Superman. And I'll never forget, I was probably about 10, 11 years old, and Superman died. They killed Superman. And I was going, how can they do that? And I got obsessed with it. I still have in my head that entire year's collection of Superman comic books where they killed him. And he came back to life. But as as I sit there and I look at it, and for those that ever, some of these superheroes have been around for a long time. Many of you guys can remember the comic books when they first started coming out. They've been around. And you see them now, you watch the movies, you hear about the things now. And I even believe in our superheroes, we've explained out our superheroes to a certain degree now. Well, that's scientifically this happened to this person, and then they got exposed to this element, and someone genetically engineered this, and it's all about science now. That's how they reason it all out. It's all about science. And they've sucked a lot of that out of it. And that shows an example of what we've done in the world. Our world has flattened everything together. Our world has flattened the eternal and the temporal together. And we don't see them in the same way that we used to. People don't believe the same way that they used to believe. And we can see that impact surrounding us in a lot of different ways. And it's in subtle ways. Until you start looking for it, you don't realize how much we have as a world. This isn't something that we've done as Nazarenes. This is not something we've done as Americans. This is not something that we've even done as Christians. This is something that we have done as a human society. The whole world, we have helped flatten the eternal and the temporal. And now, there's no longer a part that we can explain that. Physics will explain everything. That's the answer to the whole world, is physics now. And so we're living in this world that has flattened these things. And I said, and we've seen it even there, because you could have been sitting there and going, well, what in the wide world is superheroes going to have to do with Scripture? What does that have to do with Jesus? But like I said, it helps us see how we have flattened these things out. We've even flattened God, and we've flattened Scripture, we've flattened Satan, we've flattened them all out. We live in a world that has even flattened Satan into something that basically, well, he's not really a person. He's just more of a representation of evil. And evil exists in man, and so that's just a representation. There's really no heaven and hell. There's really no Satan. There's really no God. We can just read. That's just superstition. I mean, this is what they're telling us, is they're going, well, obviously, the supernatural just used to be things we couldn't explain with science. And I'm not here to sit there and say that that wasn't the case in some things. Not at all. But I'm also sitting here going, I don't live in a world that can sit here and explain how Christ died on a cross and then was raised again in 3 days. I don't live in a world that has yet still been able to explain where everything came from. Well, this transit, where did matter originally come from? They haven't been able to accurately explain those things. They have theories about how everything got put together, but where did all the stuff come from to put all of it together? And we see this even in different denominations and different religions. We see people that have flattened everything out. God is no longer the supreme being that he was, that I remember growing up with and hearing. We were sitting there talking, and there's different aspects in this passage. We're going to be looking in John chapter 1 this morning, and we're starting at the very beginning of John chapter 1. We were even talking, as a group of us talking this week, and we were looking through things, and Jehovah's Witness came up. And even Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't like the version and going back to the original wording, because if they go back to John chapter 1 and Genesis and they look at certain things, they like a certain preposition that says, that leaves it open that there was more than one God. That God was just one of many. And in reality, it says that he was the God. Not a God, but the God. But like I said, we live in this world, and so we need to really properly see. We need to understand these things because the facts are, I believe we live in a world that can be so dark, that can feel so lost at times. And even those that are us that are living in the light, we just got done going through that series about living in the light. And for even those of us that live in the light, we can sense the darkness around us. And sometimes we even are battling that darkness trying to overtake us. It's trying to snuff out the light. Or we see others that are still battling in the dark, that haven't been able to experience the light yet. And so we can feel, the world can feel so dark, it can feel so lost, that we really don't know what to do. We can begin to feel hopeless. And we wonder, what can we do? And in the world, and the way that we're viewing things, and the way the world is trying to view things now, where's the hope? Where is the hope? Because we've squished it out. We have literally flattened it and squished the hope out of this world. But if we look back at John, we can find some incredible truths in the book of John. John is usually that book of the Bible that when a new believer, we say, go read the book of John. That's where you need to start at. Read the book of John. Yeah. And John is a great book to start off with. But John can also be like, whoa, that's mind-blowing. I'm not sure I completely grasp that concept. It's good stuff, but man, it's deep. He went really deep. And he does it right out of the gate. I'm sorry, but when you start reading John chapter 1 at the very beginning, he doesn't waste any time. He just cannonballs straight into the deep end of the pool. And so in John chapter 1, we read in verse 1, it says, in the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through Him, and nothing was created except through Him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and His life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. I'm sorry, but if you flattened out this world and you read that, it's not going to make much sense, because all this does is just blow it right up. This makes it to where you're going, we all know, we've all heard the story, the Word, He's speaking of Christ. He's speaking of Jesus. How about the Trinity here? And so, I'm sorry, but there's no amount of science that can explain that. That the world was created, and then how many thousands of years later, the Son of God came down to earth and dwelled amongst us, no matter what your belief is about Jesus or about the Son of God. That's supernatural right there. That's life-altering stuff right there. Just in those 5 verses, John takes a huge chunk in the theology, our study of who God is. This is telling us who God is. And this is a big bite. And I'm going to do my absolute best this morning for us to just take a small chunk of it. There's no way we can cover all of it. There's no way. This goes deep. This is a deep, deep, deep hole that we can go down. But let's just take off what we can. See, John begins his account of Jesus' life. That's what a lot of what John is he's speaking of Jesus' ministry, of Jesus' life. And it's very interesting that he begins not at the beginning of Jesus' mortal, physical life, the man that we know or knew. He goes all the way back to the very beginning of everything. He basically starts he's paralleling Genesis here. He's going back to the creation of everything. Because let's face it, that's really where the story of the Son of God is. It goes all the way back to the very beginning of creation. Now, if we go in and you do the deep theological studies, you see that when we use the word, which is capitalized, so it's not like an actual physical word that you speak. We're talking about a person here. It's a capital, it's a proper noun.
Yeah.
So it's a capital W here. You go in and you realize that this word means logos. And we see that the word that we see logos, he already existed. And it's so important for us to know that God already existed. God wasn't created. He's telling us that God already, he says right there, the word already existed. It wasn't created, it already existed. That was before, however science wants to try to explain the universe out, whether it's through a big bang or not, it doesn't matter. Before any of that, there was the Word. He existed before any of it. And we need to know that. We need to know that our belief system, we can't science that one out right now. We can't explain that one out. Science can only talk about where stuff came from, but how something got compiled and put together. There's no way for science to explain how something came from nothing. That's not how science works. Science cannot explain how something came from nothing. Science explains how something came from something. And so even when we look at the word logos, we look at the word. Logos, see, it means reason. It means thought. It means wisdom. All these things, they're associated with Jesus. So when we sit here and we reread these things, we sit here and think about the word meaning reason and thoughts and wisdom. We sit here and say, in the beginning, the word already existed. In the beginning, reason, thought, wisdom, all of them, they already existed. And they were with God. So not only are we talking about a person, we're talking about characteristics as well. So Jesus was eternal. Just like we got done talking about. And he chose to come down to us just as we got done saying it. He lived in this eternal realm. And Jesus chose to come down from the eternal down to the temporal. Because I'm sorry, we cannot deny that there is the temporal realm. There is a beginning and there is an end. Our mortal lives will begin and they will end. They are only temporary. See, and after John establishes that Jesus was eternal, and that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to sit here and say, well, guys, he's eternal. We got to get our right of thinking right here. Don't try to think about this in flattened terms. Try to think about this in the eternal and the temporal. And Jesus was temporal. So we have to have that mindset going into it. So we have to picture in our head the eternal, and Jesus is up here in the eternal, and he came down to us in the temporal. We have to understand that and grasp that. We have to accept that. He goes in and he starts talking about the light and the dark. And I believe that just like in Genesis 1:1, God starts with darkness. And he creates light to shine in it. See, light enters into a chaotic, formless void. Light enters and it creates order out of chaos. God's wise orders push the shadowy chaos of the universe back into its boundaries. And he takes all this craziness and he brings in the light, puts order to it, boundaries to it, laws to it, brings order to chaos. And nowhere, we need to understand, nowhere does it say that light was existent and the darkness overcame it. The only thing we ever hear about is that the light overcame the dark. Darkness cannot overcome the light. Have you ever tried to do that? There is no way. You want to talk about from a science perspective, there is no way the dark can overpower the light. There's no way. Now you can try stuffing out the light. But the darkness on its own cannot overtake the light. It's impossible. See, in John, the light shines. And it's still shining today. In John, he's saying, the light entered into the world. It came into a black and chaotic and crazy world, and it brought order. And it shined, and it did those things. And guess what? It's still doing it today. The light is still shining. And the darkness has still not overcome it. We're getting ready. This is the first Sunday of Lent. We are entering into that season leading us to Easter, where the dark tried to overtake the light, and the darkness failed, and the light ended up shining brighter than it ever shone. The darkness has not overpowered it, and it never can. But we also have to understand the darkness doesn't understand the light. It doesn't get it. It doesn't understand it. See, there's a conflict between the light and the darkness. And that takes form, and we see that even in our own lives. We see in our own spiritual lives, in our own hearts, in our own minds, we see the battle between the light and the dark because they don't understand each other. And there's a conflict that's going on. We see that in the world. When people are living in darkness, they don't understand the light. We can try to explain the light to them, but they don't get it. How can you explain the light to a blind person? It's impossible to be able to explain those things. The light has to shine on them first before they can understand it. But we feel this tug of war. There's this battle going on in our hearts, in our words, in our actions, in our decisions between the light and the dark. See, creation came into being through the Word. So the Word brings about life. Light brings about life. Not darkness. Darkness doesn't bring about life. Light brings life. Throughout the gospel, we see this, and most profoundly, we see it in its conclusion. The author of life conquers even death. I said, with the ultimate darkness, conquers it. Death does not conquer him. He conquers death. And let's face it, when we sit there and think about darkness, death is at the ultimate. That is the ultimate darkness, is death. But Christ even overcame that. And I think we need to remember that. We need to understand that as we move through this Lent season, as we move through this time coming closer and closer to this celebration, to this remembrance of Christ actually doing that. See, by being a light of people, by being a light, for all people, John highlights the illuminating role of the Word. The purpose of shining the light is revelation. That's the point. Shining the light is revelation. We go out into the world. Why do we shine our light? We have that little story, don't cover up your light. You want to go out, you want to be a light on a hill, you want to let your light shine. It's for revelation. We want people to be able to see it and go, oh my goodness, I never understood what the light was, but you've helped show me what the light is. But it can also be blinding when you stare into it. Paul had a pretty good experience with that. The gospel describes both revelation and blindness. And so, and as we come to all this, we sit here and we think, okay, so I understand that we've flattened things out, that there's a temporal and there's an eternal, and that God is eternal, and we have to be prepared for these things as we're going out into the world that's trying to tell us and show us things and trying to flatten things out for us. So we need to understand these things as we go out in the world. And we need to know that God was there was at the very beginning, and that He was the author of life, and that He brings order out of chaos. But why is John trying to tell us these things? Why? What is the whole point of these things? What does it mean for me to know this about God? What does this mean for me to know this about Christ? What's the whole point? There's one word I want us to remember. And that's hope. As we go through this, that's the one thing we have to remember, is hope. I believe this tells us that it means that even though we may see and feel the darkness, there's hope. Even though we may have this understanding that has been influenced by this flattening out of mindsets and thinking, there's hope. There may be times that we feel desperate, lost, because of the darkness. But there's hope. We may know people that feel this way, that are experiencing this way, and guess what? We have a message of hope. We have the answer, and it's not science. Science is not the answer. Science is not the hope. God is the hope. Because it's not an it, it's a who. Who is the answer? The Word was embodied in human form and became a who that we can relate to. It's not some distant being somewhere. Remember, we aren't trying to grasp the eternal anymore, trying to elevate ourselves to grasp the eternal. The eternal came down to us so we can grasp the eternal. And He did it by taking human shape and human form. We can relate to Him. We can relate to the eternal. And we turn that mindset and we turn that thinking completely upside down. He blows up this modern, flattened thinking. And so no matter what our situation is, no matter how we feel this, and I know we all at times are going to feel the darkness, we're going to feel that struggle, we're going to feel that tug of war going on in our lives. Whether we are actually on the battle line of a spiritual attack from the enemy, or we're just collateral damage, or we're just living in the midst of a war zone. I don't know about you, but I'm glad to know that I have hope. That I have an answer that brings me hope. That helps me and encourages me, that I can relate to. Because we have something that the world is desperately seeking for. You look in the world today and you look around, this world needs hope more than anything right now. And they don't know where to find it. Because they're living in this world that has squished and tried to squish it out so that we lose the hope. The enemy's winning because it's happened. But we have a message of hope that we can share to this world that's been around from the very, very, very beginning. It has stood the trials of time, of attack. It does not matter what has been put up against it. Our hope lives on and wins. Let's share that message. Let's share that message of hope to a world that needs it, that is so lost they don't know what to do. Let's share the hope here this morning. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, as we look at these things and we realize, Lord, how complicated that they can really be and maybe how deep that they can be, Lord, I just pray, Lord, that out of anything that we see, out of everything that we know, Lord, we see the hope that you bring. We see the hope of what a relationship with you can bring. We see the hope that a saving relationship with you can bring. So let us pass this on to the world. May we not only experience it ourselves, but may we be able to pass on this message of hope and try to declare it to a world that is living in darkness. May we try to explain and live the light and not get sucked into this mindset and this thinking and lose the understanding, Lord, that you are who you are. No matter what we try to think, no matter what we try to do, you are who you are, and you are who you've always been, no matter what. So Lord, bring us the comfort, the strength, the encouragement that we need, Lord, to be able to bring this message of hope to the world around us. Lord, in your name, amen.
Stand.